On this episode of This Week in Linux, KDE announced their latest big release of their application suite with dozens of new app updates. We've got some distro news to talk about with KNOPPIX, Slackware, EndeavourOS, and Neptune. System76 announced some really cool news with their new Graphical Firmware Management tool. We'll talk about the CutiePi, an open source tablet project. Later in the show, we'll check out some new Humble Bundles for games and some Python programming books. Then we'll take a look at a newish media player called Celluloid. And we've got some more news to follow up on Huawei. And then we'll finish up the show with some Linux gaming news for Flycast, a Dreamcast Emulator, and some updates for Google Stadia. All that and much more coming up. I'm Michael Tennell with TuxDigital, and this is your weekly source for Linux GNews. This episode of This Week in Linux is sponsored by DigitalOcean. DigitalOcean offers the simplest, most developer-friendly cloud platform. It's optimized managing and scaling apps easy with an intuitive API, multiple storage options, integrated firewalls, load balancers, and more. You can get all this plus access to the world-class customer support for as low as $5 per month. DigitalOcean also has 2,000 cloud-agnostic tutorials to help you stay up to date with the latest open-source software, languages, and frameworks. You can get started on DigitalOcean for free with a $50 credit for an entire month of service by going to do.co/tux. That's do.co/tux. Again, you can get started on DigitalOcean with that $50 credit by going to do.co/tux. And thanks again to DigitalOcean for sponsoring This Week in Linux. Up first in the show this week is KDE has announced their big release of their application suite for 19.08. If you're not aware, KDE is the group that makes all these different applications. You know, just to be clear, if you think there's a lot of people who think that KDE is the name of the desktop environment, that's actually Plasma. KDE is the people who make all of those things. It's okay. Admittedly, it's a little more complicated than that, but that's the gist of it. But anyway, there's quite a few things that are in this release because they have a big set where they release everything at once. So all of their applications are all released at the same time, which is really cool. It means there's a lot to talk about, but there's kind of too much to talk about, so we're going to talk about just the standout features from a few applications rather than everything because there's so many things. But the goal of this release was to bring more features and better design software, which will increase usability and stability of apps like Dolphin, Console, Kate, and more. So first of all, we're going to talk about Dolphin. Dolphin has improvements to minimize clutter and also improve the information panel for various files. And they also made it where you can play media inside of the main panel from Dolphin, which is interesting. GwenView also has improvements to their thumbnail viewing. If you're not aware, GwenView is an image viewer, and they've improved the thumbnail system because they're using a low-resolution thumbnails, which makes it it makes it faster, more performant, as well as uses less resources to do so. They've also added a new share menu, which is pretty nice. Ocular has received some improvements to their EPUB support, so if you want to read ebooks from the EPUB format, you can do so inside of Ocular much better now. They've also added better support for high DPI in Ocular, which is great. Console gets a boost in their tiling features. So Console is their terminal emulator. If you're not aware, they actually already had tiling features inside of Console, but those tiling features were not that great. They were good, they were functional, but they were kind of cumbersome. And the latest improvements to Console for the tiling makes it so much easier to use, which is really nice. Because one of the things that was kind of bothersome about Console's tiling is that you'd had to prepare of how you want the tiling to be prior to doing it, because it was kind of difficult to move things around once you set them up. But now it's super easy to do it because you can just use your mouse and drag and drop things wherever you want them to be, and it makes it so much easier and so much smoother to do. So very nice. I like that. Also, Kdenlive has new improvements as well, including some new improvements to shortcuts. So the new things in Kdenlive are improvements to change the speed of a clip by just doing resizing the clip by hitting shift, and then you just resize it by clicking on the clip and then moving it back and forth. They also improved some 3-point editing operations, making it more consistent with video editors. It's like previous videos, so if you transition to Kdenlive, it makes it easier. And they've also improved some stuff like making it more control about where you move the when you move the clips from different parts of the timeline, you can control whether it keeps them synced on various different tracks, like track numbers, or whether you can move it around independently. You'd have to check out the blog post for that, because where it explains it a lot better than I can without demonstrating what it actually is, because they actually have an animated GIF that shows you how it works. They also there's many other tools that have a lot of updates, and they got a lot of bug fixes and variety of different tools like user improvements and enhancements and so on. So just go check out the latest post from the KDE for the Applications 19.08 that has a whole list of everything. So check that out if you want to learn more about it, what's in it. And also you can check out these applications really easily in most cases, because pretty much all of them, not all of them, have support for every format, but you can pretty much get any of these applications via Flatpak, Snap, or AMP images. Now, because most of them support at least one of those three, so it's pretty much easy. It's really easy to get these applications because of that. So definitely go check it out. I have a link in the show notes if you'd like to learn more and maybe even to try out some of these applications. So yeah, links KDE Applications 19.08, links in the show notes. Up next in the show is some great news from System76. So System76 created a graphical firmware manager that makes it possible to easily update your firmware in your system. Now, it used to be super annoying to do so. Not necessarily difficult, but very annoying, because you used to have to do it in your BIOS for your motherboard. And in recent years, thanks to the Linux vendor firmware service, it's been a lot easier to do. But that service relies on some other front end that's already built that utilize and integrates the features, such as GNOME Software or KDE Discover. Now, some distributions wouldn't have the ability to use these software stores like GNOME Software and KDE Discover, and they wouldn't have wouldn't have their own applications store in at all, or they wouldn't have front ends for the package manager to use it. So it would just create an issue where they couldn't get the firmware stuff because they weren't using a tool that did it. Now they have the ability to use this new firmware manager tool from System76 and implement it into their distro and have a functionality to do it through a GUI, which is really, really cool. Now, it is worth noting that this particular tool is only currently available for Debian-based distributions like Ubuntu and Pop! OS and etc. But if it might be possible in the future that someone could port it to different distribution bases. System76 has not said whether or not they will be doing that or not, but they have put it out on GitHub, so it is open source. If any distribution wants to make it support their distribution, they totally can. So that's really cool. And they also created this application for the GTK front end. Now, I personally preferred the Qt toolkit, but they said that this particular tool was created with GTK because Pop! OS uses GNOME, so it does make sense they would do so. But what's also really cool is that they say that the core of the framework is toolkit agnostic, so it makes it possible that if someone wants to develop a front end written in Qt or something else, they totally can, which is really cool. They also say that their new firmware management tool supports updating from both LVFS, the Linux vendor firmware service, as well as the System76-firmware system that they created for their own hardware. And they also made it possible to be compatible with Wayland, which is really nice. So System76 also, and I quote here, this work continues our transition from a hardware company shipping a distro to a hardware company providing an integrated, holistic hardware and OS product. Still a lot of work ahead of us, but manufacturing, open firmware, and Pop! OS are all pulling together. So it's really interesting how they're kind of shifting the path of their company, and I think it's has a lot of potential to be great. And so far, they've been making a lot of great stuff. So I can't wait to see what happens with this. And also, they've actually released a new laptop that has it's actually called the System76 Darter Pro OSFC edition. The OSFC refers to the Open Source Firmware Conference because this particular laptop is the first laptop from System76 to ship with Coreboot in place of the proprietary BIOS. So that's really cool. It has LibreBoot and Coreboot integrated into the laptop, so you can have an open source BIOS system, which is really cool. There's also quite a few things that System76 is doing from recently, like having, now having AMD support for their Thelio desktops, as well as many other things. So if you'd like to learn more, I'll have a link to their blog posts about this, as well as the rest of their blog posts in the show notes below. Up next in the show is the latest release of KNOPPIX. 8.6 was released this week, and KNOPPIX is a distribution that is based on Debian, and this particular version is the first version based on Debian 10, which is the Debian Buster. But they also have some other packages that are using the Debian stable and Debian testing and Debian unstable repo branches, and then they use those packages because it makes it better support for newer graphics drivers and better support for current hardware that's available. And just quick tangent, the term testing and unstable don't really mean what people think it means. The testing kind of does, but the Debian stable and Debian unstable don't really mean whether they have stability or not. They don't, just because the package is in unstable the branch of Debian doesn't mean that it's going to break or whatever. It could break, possible, but it's not guaranteed. So the term unstable is not a very good term for what they use it for. And it's not really Debian's fault. It's more of like a programming situation because it's used by a lot of people. And the weird thing is that 90% of people who hear it don't think about what it actually means. They consider it to be stability, but it doesn't mean that. It actually means not changing or not moving. And technically speaking, that word stable does mean that, but it also gives a misconception to people because most people are going to look at it as stability. So my suggestion would be to projects to use the word static instead, because it doesn't give that misconception. It just, explains what it really means. So that's why I don't like the term stable, and that's why unstable doesn't really mean unstable most of the time. Well, probably sometimes it does, but in this particular case, in the terms of the labels of different releases, doesn't necessarily mean it's unstable, guaranteed to break or whatever. It just means that it's not static. So anyway, tangent over. Let's move on. So this particular release of KNOPPIX has Linux kernel 5.2.5, Xorg 7.7, so they can support newer and current computer hardware that's available. And it also has the ability to support old hardware if you would like to do so, because KNOPPIX is also a very light distribution, and it's very it's known for being one of the first distributions available to boot from a live CD or a live environment, and that means it's also supporting not only 64-bit but also 32-bit. Now, in order to support really old computers, they actually have an interesting way of doing that. So most of the content is inside of a USB thumb drive or a DVD if you have that, and not all computers have support to boot USB though. So if you have a really old computer for some reason that you still use, and you need to boot from a live CD, they actually have a smaller bootable CD image that you can use to boot into the system and then use the USB stuff on the USB drive. So that's a really cool structure if you want to use really old hardware for some reason anyway. It's cool that they have that option. Now, KNOPPIX also has, by default, LXDE as their interface, but they do have other options such as GNOME 3 and KDE Plasma 5. Now, one of the things that is also really cool about KNOPPIX is they have this thing called Adrian. It's a acronym that I don't remember exactly what it all means, but it's an accessible audio-based desktop environment, which is really, really cool. So it makes it a lot easier for people who have vision disabilities or completely blind to be a lot easier to use the system through this. I've never tried it though, so I can't say how well it works or whatever, or how it works, but it does say that they have support for even Braille, which is really interesting. So if you know someone who has vision issues and wants to try out a distribution, that KNOPPIX might be an option to check out from that. KNOPPIX is a really cool distribution. It's been around for a very long time, and I like it a lot. So if you would like to check it out, you can check out the link in the show notes for KNOPPIX 8.6. Up next in the show is an interesting project that's not technically available yet, but will be coming soon, and that is the CutiePi. This is an open source tablet. So if you're looking for a fully open source tablet, including not just the software but also the hardware, then CutiePi might be something to check out. So it's pretty interesting because they have a demonstration of like what it's going to be, but they more of like have like a development build showing out how it works. And it's going to have a 1280 by 800 pixel IPS display with it will be 8-inch. By the way, I should probably specify that it's an 8-inch tablet. It's going to have a 4800 milliamp hour battery. It's going to have USB Type A support and micro SD card reader, GPIO pins. That'll 6 GPIO pins. And it's expected to be released sometime around the end of the year. So hopefully it'll be available for like, around Christmas time or whatever, but we don't know exactly for sure yet. And they also are going to be doing a crowd supply like fundraiser type thing. I don't really know when that's going to happen because unfortunately they haven't scheduled that yet. But you can go to their website and actually put in your email address to be notified when it does happen if you'd like to do so. So anyway, the CutiePi is using a Raspberry Pi 3 compute module. This makes it better because it's like allows you to make it smaller and make it more efficient rather than using a full Raspberry Pi, and that's why they're using that. They can also make it like much thinner as well. The video of the developer edition shows them pinching and zooming with like pretty good ease on the interface, as well as a really nice on-screen keyboard for browsing. So if you want to check out, I have a link to that as well. They also say about their device, whether you're opening an app or SSHing to a remote server or displaying a dashboard, CutiePi's touch-friendly interface can help you with all that. Connecting a keyboard or a mouse is no longer mandatory. So that's pretty interesting. If you want to check it out, I have a link to it in the show notes, as well as the link to their main website where you can sign up to get notified when the crowd supply thing is launched. So link in the show notes. Up next in the show is some more information about Huawei. So, previous episode I talked about Huawei and how they were making their new HarmonyOS open source operating system, and I asked if people wanted to get more information about it when they were, new stuff from Huawei came out, and people were definitely wanting to get more. So I decided I'll do a follow up for their latest thing because this is pretty interesting too. So, there's a lot of interesting things that are happening with both HarmonyOS and the Huawei company in general because according to china.org.cn, Huawei is looking to create China's first open source foundation. Now, the organization plans to bring in technology partners from all around, and the foundation is going to be launching next month. They say it's pretty interesting because they say in this article from china.org.cn, it says the plan for the software foundation came after GitHub, the world's largest host of source code, prevented in July some users from Iran and other nations like Crimea, and they were saying they were preventing them from using it because they were sanctioned by U.S. government from accessing portions of the service. So this is based on the interference from those for those people from the U.S. sanctions, making it difficult for them to use services like GitHub. And they're saying that, Huawei is looking to make its own foundation that will help to push open source and not be tied to a single company that can be interfered by, with the government. So the idea is that the foundation itself will not be just a Huawei foundation. It'll be a foundation that'll be like an open source foundation in China that other companies could utilize and be a part of as well. So China and Iran-based companies in other countries caught up in sanctions or influence will likely could have the ability to join up to help push the software forward and not have to worry about the sanctions. So it'll be interesting. Definitely be pretty interesting to see what happens with this foundation and what companies from various countries decide to join in or whatever. Because the issues with Huawei are like they have to deal with all kinds of different things about like they're not allowed to use certain types of vendors for a while, and then all of a sudden the sanctions or banning of Huawei it was kind of like pulled back a little bit, but it's still kind of there. So it's like really like up in the air in like a gray area. So we don't really know exactly what's going to happen for them, but it's interesting overall. But I think it would be good for open source because as long as it's a true open source and not like an open washing thing, they're actually true open source. I think it has a lot of potential, and it'd be very interesting to see what happens. So I'll keep you updated to let you know what happens with the new foundation thing because I'm definitely interested to see what happens, and I think you will be too. So I'll have a link in the show notes for more from the china.org.cn article if you'd like to check it out. Link in the show notes. So I just want to take a brief moment in the show to let you know about certain things related to the channel and related to this podcast. So basically it's like a housekeeping section, which is commonly done in podcasts, which I've never done for no apparent reason, and I decided I need to fix that. So last episode, I talked about the Telegram group and the Discord servers. And this is actually realized I need to make this housekeeping section because people were joining the groups and in the server and letting me know that they were happy that this existed and they didn't know it existed prior. And that's my fault because the groups and the server has been, or the Discord server and the Telegram group have existed for quite a long time, a couple years now, I think. And the last time I talked about the Telegram group and the Discord server before that was on episode 34, which was basically a year ago. So it became an annual thing that I mentioned it, accidentally, really. And I decided I need to do that more often to let you know about stuff that not only just the Telegram group and Discord server, but of various other things to talk about for the show and channel. So to clarify about the Telegram group, Discord, if you want to join those, you can have conversations with me as well as other people in the community by going to tuxdigital.com/telegram for text chat. And there's also some text chat on Discord, but if you want to do voice chat, you can do join tuxdigital.com/discord for that. And also, there is an audio podcast of this show. So if you would like to listen to the MP3 version of the show and audio only, you can subscribe to the show in your favorite podcast app, or you can, you could actually search for your podcast app in whatever app. Pretty much all platforms support it. Even Spotify, you can listen to the show on Spotify if you want to. But you can go to tuxdigital.com/thisweekinlinux to subscribe with the MP3 feed, or you can just search through it for your various whatever app you'd like to use. And you'd also can support the TuxDigital channel and this podcast by going to tuxdigital.com/Patreon or tuxdigital.com/sponsors to support the channel. I'll have a link in the show notes to both of those for Patreon and sponsors if you would like to become a patron to support the channel and this podcast. It makes it possible for me to make this show, and it also gives you some perks and rewards by becoming a patron. So you can get early access to videos. You can get access to being a part of various different things that I'm starting to do. Actually, just a bunch of different perks. I'll have a list. There'll be a list on those pages when you go to it. And if you want to support the channel without actually spending any money, well, technically money for that purpose, you could do so by using our affiliate links by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. Now, these links are links for places like Amazon, Private Internet Access, Humble Bundle, and many more. You can find a whole list of stuff that you can use to contribute to the show and to the channel without actually costing any specifically for the channel by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. And if you would like to check out the Destination Linux podcast that I'm a co-host of, I really think you should do so because the next episode is episode 135, and we have some really cool stuff on that one, including 2 interviews, one with Simon Steinbeiss, he's a developer for XFCE, and we also have the community manager and developer manager from UbiPorts, aka Ubuntu Touch. Dalton Durst joins us to have an interview with both of those. So it's definitely worth checking out. Dalton also was kind enough to stay to be our co-host of the show. So if you want to check out, I think there was a great episode to check out the podcast of Destination Linux. And you can do so by going to destinationlinux.org. Now, well, the 135 episode is not out as of right now, but it will be out soon. So you definitely need to subscribe to it by going to destinationlinux.org. You can subscribe to the RSS feed or to the YouTube channel, or just search for it, and it's your podcast app just like this one. And also, finally, I want to let you know that there's some big things coming up for this channel and the show. I can't really tell you exactly what's happening, but in the next couple of weeks or so, we're going to be doing some really interesting things. Going to launch some pretty cool stuff, some pretty big news. I can't tell you yet, but I will tell you soon. So just, subscribe and like that smash button. And also, ring the bell so you get notifications of when I post new things, as well as when I announce some stuff. So, yeah. That's it for this housekeeping segment. The first time I ever did it wasn't very clean and concise, because because I've never done it before and I didn't script anything at all. So yeah, maybe next time I'll script it. We'll see. Up next in the show is EndeavourOS. So if you're not aware, EndeavourOS is a distribution that was created from the ashes of EndeavourOS, because EndeavourOS was killed this past May, and EndeavourOS is basically being created because of the death of EndeavourOS. So it's pretty interesting because they've done quite a lot of stuff in this very small amount of time. It's only been roughly about 3 months now, and they've done quite a lot. In fact, they've actually done pretty well to the point where I am testing out Endeavour as my secondary distribution. I'm still using my primary, but Endeavour is, it's impressive to me, so I might be using it a little bit more. But it is my secondary right now, so I've been testing it out myself for the past couple weeks or so, and we'll see what happens. But so far, I'm liking it. And this latest version has updates to their Calamares installer of 3.2.11. They've updated their kernel and Mesa drivers to 5.2.8 and 19.1.4 respectively. They've also done some updates to their Nuvo drivers as well as the Broadcom kernel modules, and they've also made some improvements, such as fixing some issues with inside of Calamares that previously there weren't. The auto login wasn't working. It now is working, and they also fixed the VirtualBox detection. So if you run EndeavourOS in VirtualBox, it will detect that and make some changes based on that. So the experience will be better out of the box in VirtualBox if you were to do that. So it's pretty cool. It's a really interesting distribution, and I look forward to see what happens with it. It has a lot of potential, and yeah. So if you'd like to learn more about this, we've actually talked about EndeavourOS in a previous episode with more details, and I will definitely be doing a review of this distribution because so far I am liking it a lot. So we'll see about whether I use it or not. It's the primary, but I definitely will make a video about it because I am a fan of what they're doing, and especially of what their roadmap is, where they're going to be doing an easier install of Arch than other options are. And the funny thing is that EndeavourOS was a distribution that people called the easy installer for Arch, but EndeavourOS was a lot more than that, and that's kind of why it didn't work out in the long run. It's because they wanted to do too much. So this is an interesting thing because Endeavour is basically doing what everyone thought EndeavourOS was, but doing it, actually doing it, so I think that is really cool. So anyway, if you'd like to learn more about EndeavourOS, I have a link to it in the show notes below. Up next in the show this week is Neptune 6.0. So Neptune is a distribution of Linux based on Debian. This is actually the first version of the Debian Buster or Debian 10 series for Neptune. So they have KDE Plasma 5.14.5. They have kernel 4.19.37. And as you can see, it's not the most up-to-date version because it's using Debian Stable. And some distributions will take Debian Stable and also add some other packages, like we talked about with KNOPPIX. But Neptune is more focused on taking the Debian Stable and then polishing it up in the way that they think that they like it. So if you are looking for a distribution that's like that, where it's a Debian Stable-based distribution and also has customizations based on what they prefer, then it might be worth checking out for you. It's actually pretty interesting that they customize the Plasma in a way that they don't use the really super bright version of Plasma by default, which is good. That's a weird default. Anyway, if you are interested in checking it out, I have a link to Neptune 6.0 in the show notes. And for the last topic of distro news this week, we're going to talk about Slackware. So Slackware actually created a Patreon that if you would like to support the Slackware distribution, you can do so. I'll have a link in the show notes to that particular link. And it's interesting because if you're not aware, it might be weird that I'm talking about a Patreon for the distribution. But this is actually something that is interesting because of the previous history of Slackware. So Slackware has been around for a very long time, since 1993. Slackware is the oldest currently active distribution, period. It wasn't the first ever distribution, but it's been around like all the other ones no longer exist, so it's the longest running one. And they've done a lot of work for the community and the ecosystem, And it's kind of weird because in a previous episode, the fact that they made a Patreon is not weird. What was weird is that they had a store a while back where you could buy CDs and stuff, and I think there was merch or something. But the store wasn't actually a Slackware controlled store. It was made by other people, and those people were taking advantage of Slackware and the developers, and to the point of like taking a ridiculous percentage of how much money was being made in the store, and basically ripping off the Slackware team and the main developer. So to a ridiculous level. So, for example, he said that the 14.2 release generated nearly $100,000 in revenue. The store gave the Slackware founder $15,000 instead of out of the $100,000. And they also then said later that he was overpaid. So the level of absurdity and how massively ridiculous that was is just astounding. So he decided to completely cut ties with them because obviously they're horrible and he should. And we talked about this particular issue in episode 34 of This Week in Linux. If you'd like to go check that out, I'll have a link in the show notes to that segment. It's interesting. I go in way more detail in that particular episode if you would want to know more about this. But this is really cool that they created a Patreon because it makes people allows people to contribute to the Slackware distribution because it's basically like a big legacy distribution as well. Anyway, if you'd like to support the Slackware distribution, you can find a link to their Patreon in the show notes below. Up next in the show is a new-ish application, and by new I mean it's not actually new, but they've renamed it in their latest release, so it looks kind of new. It seems new because it's got a new name, but it's actually a GTK front end to MPV. MPV is a fantastic media player, and it's actually my preference. I've not used this particular front end because I like the regular MPV, but if you would like a front end to MPV, then I would say check out Celluloid. This was the new name for the what it used to be called was GNOME MPV or GNOME MPV, and they've changed it to Celluloid. Now that seems like a weird name, and it kind of is, but it also sort of makes sense when if you know what celluloid is. It's basically a flammable material that is made from like a couple chemicals. And then you also use this material to make photographic and movie film. So it does make sense. In this latest release, they have migrated from OpenGL-CB to the new Render API, and they've also added some new key bindings, be able to use Unicode key bindings and numpad key bindings, as well as made better support for media keys on your keyboard. So you can now forward those media key events to MPV. So this is pretty cool, and I think that MPV is easily my favorite media player. I haven't tried Celluloid yet, but I do plan on checking it out. If you would like to check it out yourself, I'll have a link in the show notes below. Up next in the show are some Humble bundles. So we're going to talk about a couple, a game bundle and a book bundle. So first of all, the game bundle is called the Jackbox Party Games Bundle, and it is based on the franchise for You Don't Know Jack. Now, there are a couple games that are actually like with the name You Don't Know Jack. Those are not Linux native native games, but the Jackbox Party games are. Those other ones might work in Proton. I'm not sure. I didn't have time to check, but they might work. I don't know. But the Jackbox Party games are native to Linux, so those will work just fine if you're interested in that kind of like a party game thing, like a group, hangout game sort of stuff. I'll have a link to that in the show notes. And also, one of the reasons I wanted to cover Humble Bundle is because they have this new bundle for Python programming. And they have a lot of great books in here, and there's also some fun ones. So first of all, they have stuff like Automate the Boring Stuff with Python. That's cool. Invent Your Own Computer Games with Python. All right. Python for Kids, Python Playground, Impractical Python Projects. That's pretty fun. and also some hacker stuff. They have a black hat Python and a gray hat Python book for like teaching you how to use Python for pen testing. So there's actually quite a few books in here that are pretty interesting. So if you would like to check it out, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. And before we move on to the next topic, I wanted to let you know that these links are affiliate links. So if you do decide to purchase either one of these bundles, please use that link because it will give a small percentage to the TuxDigital channel and to this podcast, and it helped me make this show possible. So if you don't mind, please use that link in the show notes below if you do decide to purchase one of these bundles. Up next in the show is Flycast. Flycast is a Dreamcast emulator, and it's an open source project as well. And Flycast is really interesting because it's a fork of another application called Rycast. I think it's how you say that one, or Raycast. I'm not sure, maybe. But it's a fork of that, and it seems to be having a lot more development on the Flycast side because there's some things that have been done for that is very good and very cool. So Flycast is made by Flying Head, and they've significantly improved their BIOS support system for the HLE BIOS. And they've said that this has support for 90% of Dreamcast games now. So both of the versions that they create Flycast with are now supported up to like 90% of Dreamcast games. Now, the reason why this is cool is because this marks like an important point in the development of the project where users are no longer required to go seek out external Dreamcast BIOS files. Because for Rycast and previous versions of Flycast, you actually had to get these specific BIOS files from a Dreamcast. So you had to dump the files from an actual Dreamcast or figure out where to download them from. And then that way that the emulator would work. Now, with this HLE BIOS support, they don't actually have to do that, so you can just run a Dreamcast game out of the box without having to set up any of the specific BIOS stuff. So this is fantastic because that is a huge improvement to the previous versions, as well as the previous forked project or original project, I guess. And also HLE BIOS is now enabled by default. So if you install Flycast, you can actually try it out if you have these ROMs, GD ROMs, I'm pretty sure they're called. So if you want to learn more about this, I'll have a link to it in the show notes. But also maybe it's worth noting that the way that Flycast works is there's two different versions. One's called just regular, and the other one's called Windows CE. So you got to make sure you get the regular version. And then but they're actually working on merging those together into make one single version. That will be coming sometime next month. That's the plan anyway. But I think it's just worth noting that also the save states, if you already use Flycast and you have save states in previous games, those are not compatible yet with its latest version. So if you do, then there's that. So if you haven't heard of Flycast, then you should definitely check it out if you're interested in Dreamcast games. I have actually seen this before, but I didn't try to even play it or use it because of the whole BIOS setup file stuff. I didn't think it was worth the effort. And now that I don't have to do that, I'm definitely interested. Can't wait to do some Crazy Taxi. And finally this week is Google Stadia. So Google Stadia is a service that Google is starting in November of this year, where you'll be able to use your existing devices, or I think you actually have to, if you're going to get the first version, you're going to have to get the Chromecast, but the Founder Edition, and it'll be like $120 to get the controller and the other stuff to, make it all work and everything. And then in the future, it's a $10 a month fee to play some games and get, whatever. Now, it's interesting because people might think about this being a Netflix for games, but it's not that at all. Because Netflix, you pay a small fee and you can watch whatever you want anytime you want. Whereas Google Stadia, you pay a small fee and you get some extra benefits, but it's mostly like getting better resolution and that kind of thing and better frame rate, I guess. But you're not getting access to the games. You still have to buy the games. You will get a free game once a month, but it's a random game that they just give you. So that's, it's not the same thing at all. There's a lot of potential to this, and it is interesting because there's companies that tried to do this in the past that failed. It didn't work, like on live. It didn't really work. But at this point, the data servers are at the same, and the speeds of connections are so, good these days in comparison to what they used to be at the time that OnLive tried it. It's, there's potential there. And I really, really like the fact that Google Stadia is based on Linux. So people might be thinking, why are you talking about this? If you've not heard of this before, you might be thinking, why are you talking about this? It's because Google Stadia is based on Debian Linux. All the servers are powered by Debian, and also all the games are powered by Vulkan. So there's a couple reasons why this is awesome. One, using Linux. Two, there's potential here for support for these games to be on Linux. And that is what I'm super excited about. I don't care about Google Stadia, really. I care about the fact that it might happen. I don't know if it will. Maybe there's some exclusive deal or something. Who knows? Google's involved, so it could be all kinds of weird nonsense. I'm not a fan of Google in general. So it's just, it has a lot of potential to benefit Linux if these games, by working on Stadia, also mean they work on Linux, because if they're focused on working with Debian and Vulkan, there's a high possibility that they'll also work in basically just using any Linux system. And I'm super excited because of that potential possibility. And also because the games that were announced recently for Google Stadia. One of them being Attack on Titan 2, Cyberpunk 2077, Doom Eternal, Borderlands 3, Grid, Mortal Kombat 11, like so many games that I want to play, but typically wouldn't be available for Linux, at least not for a while. And maybe by Google Stadia using Linux as the basis for their system, it might give incentive to the developers to like, hey, we already make it for Linux anyway, we might as well push it to them here. So that's what I'm hoping for, crossing my fingers and stuff. But I don't know. Hopefully that's what happens. We'll see. If you'd like to learn more about this particular update, I'll have a link to their announcement video in the show notes below. Thanks for watching this episode of This Week in Linux. If you like what I do here on the show, please like that smash button and be sure to subscribe. If you'd like to support the TuxDigital channel, we have multiple ways to contribute via PayPal, Patreon, Sponsors, and many others. You can learn more by going to tuxdigital.com/contribute. Or you can order the Linux is Everywhere t-shirt by going to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere. Or if you're in Europe, you can go to tuxdigital.com/Linux is Everywhere EU for shipping inside of Europe. We also have ways to contribute without any cost to you by using our affiliate links. You can find links for places like Amazon, Private Internet Access, Humble Bundle, and many more by going to tuxdigital.com/affiliates. If you'd like some more podcasting goodness from me, then check out the latest episode of Destination Linux, as I am a co-host of that show. And just a quick reminder, episode 135 is going to have an interview with a representative from XFCE with Simon, and also another interview with Dalton, who's a representative of UbiPorts, aka Ubuntu Touch. So be sure to check that out. And thanks again for watching. I'm Michael Tannell with TuxDigital. And as always, keep using, learning, and enjoying Linux.